Alright, so I've just reset both my 15-degree board and my 45 board. I've spent about a week doing it, but I've not tested any of the problems yet. If you watched my last episode, I answered a lot of the questions that you guys sent in about how to train on boards, but I only got through about half of the questions that you sent in. So in this episode, I'm going to get my rock shoes on and climb some of these problems and answer some more of your questions while I'm doing it. I'm quite nervous now because in the last episode, I said that I was fairly confident that most of these circuits wouldn't need any tweaking. And I'll be interested to see if that really pans out, if they will climb well, or I'll need to change loads of them. We'll soon see. Let's get the rock shoes on and see. Right, I'm just going to start at the start on the easiest problem, which is this white circuit. And this is how I will warm up going forward on this board. Usually the very first thing I do before anything else is just get on and pull on some jugs. I know that a lot of people do some floor exercises or some general warm-up exercises before they even touch a hold. I'm perfectly happy to just jump on the wall and move around on some big holds. This is very, very low intensity, and I'm quite happy to do that right off the couch. Well, that one worked out just fine, maybe about 6A plus, no tweaking required. So I'll start going through your questions. In the last episode, I had said that I'd sent you guys a request for all your questions about how to use boards and how to set on boards. So that's the questions I'm going through now. So I'm going to start with Ricardo's question about doing endurance training. So he says, do you still do endurance training like in your video about training for Rhapsody, which was ultra low intensity long laps? How would you suggest doing this if your circuit board is 50 degrees overhanging? I don't think you can. Well, I certainly can't anyway. And I think for that sort of intensity where it's like super low, fully aerobic, continuous climbing for 20 minutes, half an hour, sort of steady state climbing. I don't know of many people around who can do that at 50 degrees or 45 degrees. I think you're almost always going to need to be on something easier. So if you only have the 50-degree board, you may need to go to another venue. Now obviously that might be your leading wall, that would probably be the most convenient place to do it, or it might be a local crag. Before climbing walls, climbers would often do this on stone bridges, vertical, crimpy stone bridges where you had a lot of weight on your feet and they were quite technical, and you could traverse back and forward, and sometimes on really long walls. And obviously they've kind of gone out of fashion because climbing walls are so good these days, but they're not to be discounted altogether. I think they still have their place. So if you've got a 50-degree board in your house and you can use that for your hard bouldering, but you need something to do long duration, low intensity endurance laps, and you've got a stone bridge around the corner from your house, then use both. So someone asked an interesting question. When resetting a board like yours, are there any aspects of training that can't be set for? I guess head game would be one. What do others often forget or leave out when setting for a wall like yours? I think there are actually surprisingly few aspects of training that can't be set for at all. So taking head game as an example, it's not so much in the setting, it's more in the execution of the climbing. So any climb on any surface of any type can test your head game. When I'm bouldering, especially on the steep board, I'm trying really hard stuff, but sometimes on the endurance stuff as well, you still have to work your projects and then try and red point them, try and make a successful ascent of them. And I do put a little bit of pressure on myself to try and make an attempt successful, but then obviously they aren't always. So you also have to deal with like, well, I wanted that to be a successful send and it wasn't. And so you have to be relaxed about that. And so that day in, day out practice in a sort of low consequence environment where it's not the last day of your trip and your only chance to red point a route, or it's not a hard trad route where there's a physical consequence of falling off. That low level pressure to just execute on a daily basis is what tests your head game. It's also the same on the endurance circuits. You're having to keep your technique clean, keep your composure and your concentration when you're pumped. That's a challenge for any climber, and route climbers, maybe especially trad climbers, become much more expert at that. This is often a weakness in people who are mainly boulderers or have been in the past, but then they move on to doing route climbing, sport climbing, where they actually find it difficult to maintain composure or especially regain composure at a shakeout. And sometimes they kind of marvel at people who seem to be able to do really long pitches and just, get flustered, stressed, get through a crux at their limit, but then fully relax again and start the next section of the pitch as if they were starting anew on a fresh attempt. And they feel like that's sort of an abnormally high level of composure, but it's not. It just reflects the practice of the climbing they've done. So going round and round these circuits and being pumped and thinking, well, I might not get through this next round of the circuit, is again that day-to-day low-level test of your composure, which you can't magic on the real crags. Well, that blue was rather harder than I expected. I thought that would be like a sort of 7A, 7A plus, but it felt more like 7B plus. And I don't often have 7B plus on this board, so that's quite nice. The second half of it's really fingery and sustained actually, so happy with that. Right, another question. This is more of a technical question. Is there a mathematical formula or something to find the ideal spot for your foot, or is it just based on feel? I think probably neither. It's based on feel and observation, but not a mathematical formula. It's definitely not a formula. So you just think of a foothold. Let me get my rock shoot. So a right foot, can you see that one there? So this is quite a long foothold. The best spot for your foot is really the same as the best spot for your hand. It's just the biggest, most in-cut part that makes sense for the move you're doing. So sometimes it makes sense to use the smaller or poorer part of a foothold if the direction you're climbing in suits that purpose. So for example, I have a problem on this these green holds. You start off holding it as a pinch, but then you're going that way leftwards across the board, so you just stand on the top of the foothold. But possibly if the move was different, if there was another foothold out there, I would stand on that part and do a drop knee move off my right foot. Or possibly if I was rocking over going rightwards, I would actually frog it and have my knee out like that and put my foot on that part of the hold. So generally speaking, the best part for your foot is going to be exactly the same as the best part for your hand, the biggest, most in-cut part of the hold. But there may be reasons to deviate from that depending on the move you're doing. So this is an issue of understanding the move you're trying to do, what you want the foothold to actually do for you. So that's going to come down to observation of not just the foothold you want to use, but the whole move you're doing and feel. So once you actually place your foot on the spot you think it's going to be, sometimes a little bit of movement just to feel it actually bite and engage with the foothold is what you need. Right, let's try another circuit. I'm not quite recovered from the last one, but here we go anyway. I think I'm going to try this grey. I think it might be slightly easier than that last one. Whoop, that moved. Oh well, that's the end of that circuit. The whole broke mid-circuit. That was a good example of composure. That's the kind of thing that sometimes happens, will happen in a career of climbing when you're on a trad route or soloing or in some situation where you can't fall off and you feel like a foot will kind of go under your foot and you have to reflexively kind of hold on a bit tighter with your hands and try and not fall off. Oh well, I have to change that one, so that one can wait till later. Dizzy Vision asks, due to life's curveballs, I've been off the boil for about 9 months, no climbing or hangboarding. Oh, that's rough. Or any exercise at all. I had followed your hangboarding video religiously before, and now that I'm back, I can barely hang onto the 23mm for 10 seconds with no added weight, and it's utterly demoralising. Yeah, as it always is when you're not fit. With your recent video explaining that you are not in too dissimilar a position, are you setting up your wall specifically for a gradual build-up? Fewer crimps and small pinches and more blocky or druggy holds while you regain performance, or are you all guns blazing, making things just as tough and as extreme as usual? I would say just the same as usual, because even within a board, you still have a big spectrum of difficulty. It's fine to set problems on the wall that you can't do yet. In fact, you know, I have a whole set of problems on here which I have never done in 10 years and they still remain projects, and possibly they always will. That's totally cool. A board even the quarter the size of this one should still have plenty of scope for plenty of problems at a whole range of difficulty levels. So if you can only manage a quarter of them, or a third of them, or half of them, that's totally fine. So I wouldn't feel any need to set it any differently. And the thing is, like, if you're setting it spray wall style, you're just putting all the holes on the wall and then setting problems with different footholds. So you can use the same handholds, quite fingery handholds, but if you just add in one more foothold or tweak the foothold positions, you can make the climb completely different, like grades and grades easier. So I don't think this is a major concern. I would just set it nicely with the future in mind. Possibly if you're years away from coming to a certain level, I wouldn't set it for that. But if it's months away, then I think that's fine. Simon has a question. Simon's climbed on this board before, and he's asking about, first of all, about paint. So I just used normal paint on this wall. I think I used, I don't know if we call it semi-gloss, but it had like a moderate sheen. So it is kind of smooth and easy to wash, because I usually wash the wall when I reset it. I'm not so keen on friction paint, and it just wears your rock shoes out anyway. But his second question is, he says, looks like you set problems by colour, so how do your footholds fit in? A selection of 3 colours, so that then you pick footers to go with each problem. So on this circuit board, I just have all set problems with the same colour footholds, with only a couple of exceptions where I've got 2 wood circuits that share wood footholds. But on this board, I've got circuits which are by colour, and I've got the same colour footholds. But I also have a selection of these black screw-ons, and there's, I don't know how many, there's like maybe 10 on this board, and so obviously it's a big board, and I just use those. So for all my wood problems, I tend to use black footholds, and in some of the problems I'll use the handholds as well, but not in all cases. Rather than trying to use more of them, I'm trying to use less of them. So a lot of my board problems have very, very few footholds. A proportion of the time it's just like 2 start footholds, and then you're just using the same as the handholds, including I don't mind putting my feet on the wood holds. Occasionally if they get really manky, then I'll just give them like just a light touch with the sandpaper, and then they're fine again. I hope it's obvious that 15 degrees overhanging gives quite a different character from vertical. I think if you're not climbing at a higher level and you're not going to set a 45 board, I mean, I think most people probably should set a 45 board, even if they're not far into their climbing journey. If not, then 40, 35 would also work fine. But if you have a space that suits having a less steep board that you're going to use more for endurance-based work, then I really like that 15 to 20 degrees overhanging, because you can still get very nice character of moves, that gently overhanging sport style, which is much nicer than vertical stuff, and much easier to set continuous climbing on. Actually 15 degrees is probably not quite steep enough. I think maybe if I was doing this board again, rather than having the 15 with a slight kick out at the top to 25, I think it is, I would just make it 20 the whole way. Oh, that's so cool. Really good. That was the best one yet. I would say that most of the circuits I've set so far have been okay, like 2-star if you like, but that was a 3-star. That was the elusive flowy moves that felt nice to do, and that was only in the first go. You know, once I've done that 100 times, it'll probably feel way nicer again. Well chuffed with that. The thing is, like, there's always a question with the setting is how do you bottle that and to do it consistently? Not very easily. You just need to be doing it all the time. Right, let's try this pink. another question. So Dennis asks, as a fan of slabs and near verticals, what are for me the actual benefits of training on a board that's more angled than what I do outdoors? I tend to have a once weekly limit session on a 35 board, which I see as more as a fun replacement for fingerboarding. But am I wrong to equate the two? And does it help my outdoor climbing? Well, you're taking your first question about equating fingerboarding with board climbing. They overlap for sure. Both are very finger intensive, but they're not quite the same. Fingerboarding more intensely targets your fingers, and that's its benefit, but its trade-off is that it doesn't really do anything else. Board climbing is able to train strength in the whole body, but definitely the whole of the upper body. I really feel that all climbers need to do a bit of both or something similar. There are, of course, climbers who never train on a fingerboard at all, only climb on boards, and there are also some who never climb on boards and only on fingerboards. And that's fine so long as the quality of the climbing that you're doing is appropriate. You know, it may be that your technique is advanced enough that you could switch a lot of your training from a board onto a fingerboard and get on just fine. I kind of did that when I started fingerboarding, and it worked for me really well. But I had a lot of experience of climbing at all angles and shapes and sizes and just different styles of climbing. But I still think that most climbers would benefit from some board climbing and some fingerboarding as well. But will board climbing help your outdoor climbing if you're doing it on either vertical or steep slab? Yes, I think it will, because some climbing at that angle feels like board climbing. You can get very powerful climbing even on slabs where you've got a big, for example, you've got a big smear on a slab and quite a big undercut flake or a flat side pull quite close to your hand, and you've got to do a very powerful move, maybe to cross through, for example, and that feels very much like a board style climb. Alternatively, even rockovers with a foot well out to the side, where you have to really pull your way over the foot at the same time as very aggressively mantle onto small crimps. That is actually pretty similar to the style of move that you do on steep boards. So slab climbing can be delicate and technical, yes, but it can also be powerful and aggressive. And for that reason, I think board climbing can be definitely of assistance for climbing at that angle. You enjoying the sunshine? You enjoying the sunshine? Here's an interesting question about training in general. Hey Dave, do you believe that board climbing, volume primarily, and outdoor projecting at your limit is sufficient diversity for fueling climbing technique learning? No, I don't think so. I think some on-sighting, or actually quite a lot of on-sighting, is pretty important as well. And I think that's especially true if you're in the development phase of your climbing, i.e. the first 10 to 15, maybe even 20 years. I think a really high volume of on-site climbing is critical for exposing you to a wide enough variety of movement and to be able to train your brain to be able to make adjustments on the hop. I mean, I feel that actually right now, because I'm sort of semi-on-sighting these circuits on the board that I've set in my trainers like a week ago and then not touched. And so it all feels kind of foreign, and as I'm climbing them, in my head I'm thinking I would really benefit from a couple of weeks of just going on-sighting. Every year, if I can, I try to do as many on-sites on trad as I can for a spell, especially early in the season, and it just helps with all aspects of your climbing. You know, your confidence and precision with your technique, but also your composure in general, your psychological confidence and your technique for on-sighting, but also that plays directly into your red pointing as well, and your psychological boldness, and obviously your stamina, your endurance as well. So projecting outside and board climbing are important ingredients of training, but they're just ingredients, they are not the whole picture, I would say. If you've been climbing for decades and you've got all that on-sighting under your belt from many years ago, which a lot of climbers have, including myself, then you can definitely get away with significant periods of doing less of that. But if you've not done it in the first place, you definitely need to do it. Let's do one more question. I know in this video I've just been on my 15-degree board and not so much on the 45, but I'm going to finish off with a question that mainly applies to 45 board training. So James Clark asks, what are the pros and cons of the two styles of system board? Plastic holds, where feet mainly follow hands, or wood hand holds with separate small screw-ons for feet. If you only had room for a small system board, which style would you choose and why? I think for a really small board, I probably would choose small wood holds with separate screw-ons for feet, just because wood is just so nice to train on, especially in warm conditions. And it works well for like really fingery small holds, because otherwise they can be kind of nasty on your skin, the small resin crimps. But even though I would do small screw-ons for feet, I still would limit the number of them so that it feels almost like climbing feet full hands, if you know what I mean. Because that always makes the climbing not only more interesting, but more core intensive and more technique intensive. Limiting footholds forces you to discipline yourself, basically. I don't really want to reduce bouldering to just an exercise in pure pulling on small edges. You can do both at the same time. If you have a preference for one or the other, then I think either is fine. But there's one thing that I think people should be a bit careful of. There are some boards in commercial gyms and also in some home boards where there's lots of small screw-ons arranged in a grid, and you can basically use any of them in the problems. And I think that is not the best situation, because you just end up just walking your feet in lots of small movements and never really challenging your core, your stabilization from your shoulder, from your trunk, from your hips, and just the whole chain basically. And often people that climb a lot on those boards, even if they're relatively strong in the fingers, they can really struggle when it comes to outdoor problems or just set problems on normal climbing walls. So if you do climb on a board that with a grid footholds and it's your board, then take some of them off. And if it's a commercial climbing wall, then just set problems where you actually set limited footholds rather than just use any of them. Okay, I have got one more to do, which is my grey. I've replaced the hold that broke earlier on, so I'm going to give that a go, and then if I can do that, then I'll call it a night and I'll rejoin you in another episode on this side. Okay, here we go, last circuit.